there everybody, I'm Joe the Disney Guy and welcome to another Disney Guy review. Today we're going to take a look at the last animated film that Walt ever worked on. It's time to look at some bare necessities with The Jungle Book. The 1950s and 60s in general were a different time at the Disney studios. With Walt's attention divided among his various ventures, he began to lean a lot more on his current staff to take care of the animated film department. One of Disney's most trusted hands at the studio was longtime storyman Bill Peet. Peet, who had been with the company since 1937, had taken the lead on many of Disney's projects in the 60s, including writing both 101 Dalmatians and The Sword and the Stone all by himself. Bear in mind that Walt was relying on a lot of his veterans during this time, particularly the 9 Old Men. But what made Peet so unique was that he was the primary person who was dealing with story, which historically was Walt's bread and butter. Because of this, you could conceivably argue that Bill Peet was Walt Disney's right-hand man during this time. One day, Peet suggested to Walt that the studio could handle more complex animal characters, and pitched an adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's 1894 collection of stories, The Jungle Book, as Disney's next animated feature. Disney consented, and Peet put together a story treatment, again on his own, and showed storyboards to Walt, which received a positive reaction. Unfortunately, around this time, reactions to Disney's last film, The Sword and the Stone, were lukewarm, and despite the financial gains that the movie made, Walt started to become more critical of Bill Peet. Now, this doesn't necessarily seem fair. After all, Sword and the Stone did make money, and it's a bit much to put all of the blame for a movie on one person. But remember, Walt was a perfectionist, and it was clear that the negative reviews were starting to get to him. And not only did Peet write the entire script of Sword and the Stone, but if you remember from last review, he was a major advocate for why Sword and the Stone was chosen to be produced over another movie in production at the Disney studio at the time, Chanticleer. In a lot of ways, The Sword and the Stone was Bill Peet's movie, so its relative failure was squarely on his shoulders. Walt began to question how dark Peet was making the story, and claimed that he didn't want to release a film that had such dark elements. Peet, who was faithfully following the book, disagreed with Walt, and the disagreement between the two over the direction of The Jungle Book began to escalate. Finally, Walt actually took Peet off the project, which led to Peet leaving the studio in anger after 27 years. It really is kind of crazy and sort of sad how things went down between Bill Peet and Walt Disney. Only a couple years earlier, Peet was such a respected advisor of Walt that he was writing solo scripts for animated films, arguably the cornerstone of the entire Disney company, and then, just like that, he's gone. Now, in fairness, arguments do tend to happen between two creative minds, and Peet and Disney did always have, let's say, personality disagreements, but it's still sad nonetheless to see Peet stay at the company and in such contentious fashion. With Peet gone from the studio, his script was almost entirely thrown out, and Disney assigned writer Larry Clemens to take over the project. Due to the departure of Peet and the performances of some of Disney's most recent movies, Walt decided to take a much more active role in the development of The Jungle Book than he had since the 50s. Upon meeting with Clemens and the rest of the writing team, Walt asked who among them had actually read Kipling's book. When no one said that they had, Walt actually asked for none of them to read it while the film was in development. You know, this is one of the things that I always loved about Walt. We're talking about one of the most respected works of literature around, a story that at that time had been in publication for over 70 years. And Walt says, yeah, that's great, give me the characters and I'll come up with an even better story. You have to at least admire the bravado of Walt, no? Walt decided to handle the story writing process for The Jungle Book much like they had in the past, with storyboarding and outlines as opposed to a traditional script. And also breaking from the norm, production had actually started on the film before an ending to the movie was even worked out. The issue that the crew ran into was finding a legitimate reason for Mowgli to choose to return to the man village, as opposed to staying with his friends in the jungle. One day, Walt suggested that a girl be the one to convince Mowgli to leave, in order to add a taste of romance to the film. Animator Ollie Johnston was against this development when it was suggested, but after seeing the storyboards for the scene, warmed to the idea. You know, I'm kind of with Ollie on this one. I always thought it was a cheap plot device to end the story, and it's interesting to see the people who were working on the film actually had the same opinion as me. But, hey, there's a reason why Walt's the best, so who am I to disagree? Throughout the storyboard process, however, much more attention was paid to character development rather than to plot progression, leading to some fully fleshed out scenes, such as ones involving a character named Rocky the Rhino, being cut due to the flow of the movie. Instead, Walt felt that the stronger and more charismatic the characters, the more the scenes would naturally write themselves, and the better the film would be as a whole. To that effect, the voices in the film would be more important than ever in order to bring these charismatic characters to life. With this in mind, Walt decided to go with a mix of old standbys and, for the first time since Cliff Edwards and Pinocchio, popular actors whose voices would be recognized by a mainstream audience. Disney regulars Sterling Holloway and Verna Felton were brought in as Kaa and Winifred the Elephant. Television star Sebastian Cabot was cast as Bagheera, swing singer Louis Primo was given King Louie, and film star George Sanders was given the role of the villain Shere Khan. I've always found it interesting to see how Disney cast their roles. Especially today, it's not all that unusual and in many ways expected to see some big names attached to voices in animated classics. But for every big name, there's usually a couple unknowns who are attached to the project as well. Just goes to show you that back then and even today, Disney is more concerned with voices that fit the character rather than their standing in Hollywood's hierarchy. But not every voice cast for the film was simple, and finding people to play the two most important characters, Mowgli and Baloo, wasn't without its fair share of difficulty. Popular child actor David Bailey was originally cast as Mowgli, but during the 3 years of production on The Jungle Book, Bailey's voice changed, and much like they had to do on Sword in the Stone, Disney asked Wolfgang Reitherman's son, Bruce, to step in and take over the role. Unlike Sword in the Stone, however, Reitherman re-recorded all of the lines that were previously performed by Bailey, giving Mowgli one uniform voice throughout the movie. As for Baloo, the crew was having issues finding a voice to match the fun-loving character, before Walt suggested trying out his friend, jazz musician Phil Harris. Although the suggestion was a bit unorthodox, as Harris had never done voice acting before, the crew agreed to give the role to Harris after hearing him read for the part. One of the unexpected benefits to casting Phil Harris was that he brought his naturally cool persona to the already cool character of Baloo. When Harris first started reading lines for the film, he actually struggled with them a little bit because they weren't written the way that he would say them. So, to make him more comfortable, the writer just told him to read the lines exactly how he would say them. And the rest, as they say, is history. Once again, the 9 old men were leaned on heavily for the animation of the film. Wolfgang Reitherman again took the role of director, Ken Anderson handled character designs, John Lounsbury was the lead animator on the elephants, Milt Kahl gave his usual fun, energetic animations, but the real stars of the production were Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. The two best friends worked tirelessly on the film together, and in the end, accounted for over half of the animation done for the entire film. The production again used xerography as a basis, but in a new twist, animators tried the look of xerography blended with traditional animation. The backgrounds were done in a return to the traditional style, and the faces of some of the characters, such as the girl at the end of the film, were inked by hand to give them more personality. It's interesting because for those Disney fans who saw the modern short Paperman, this sort of hybrid style is being brought back, though with CGI instead of with Xerox cells. This goes to show you that no matter how much time passes, there really is nothing that can quite match some good quality hand-drawn animation. The music on the film also went through similar changes that the story did. George Bruns again did the score of the film, and in addition to the original music written for the film, also brought back various cues from classics such as Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. In terms of the songs, at first, Terry Gilkyson wrote 8 songs for the film, but many of them were matching the more serious tone of Pete's original script. When the decision was made to lighten up the feel of the film, Walt decided to replace Gilkyson with his go-to guys, the Sherman Brothers, feeling that they could write more fun songs based on the characters. Walt also intended on scrapping all of Gilkyson's music and starting over, but the crew did beg for one of his songs to remain in the film, the Bare Necessities, to which Walt relented. The Sherman Brothers then wrote 7 new songs for the film, including a repurposing of the deleted song from Mary Poppins for Trust in Me, and writing a pop rock song for the Vultures called We're Your Friends, with the intentions that the Beatles would be voicing the Vultures. Unfortunately, scheduling conflicts and John Lennon's alleged disapproval of being in an animated film forced the mega group out of the picture, and in response to this, Walt asked the Sherman Brothers to change the style of the song to make both the music and the film more timeless, leading to the final version of the song being a barbershop quartet. A couple last interesting notes on the music. First, the Beatles actually starred in The Yellow Submarine, an animated film in 1968, which was 1 year after the release of The Jungle Book, so read into that as you will. And second, when you have the jazz and swing voices of Louis Prima and Phil Harris, it's only natural that you give them a song that fits their talents, which led to the birth of I Want to Be Like You. Disney actually brought in Louis Prima's band to record the song live, and a lot of elements from the song, including the scat call and answer, were actually improvised right there on the spot. Somewhere in the Disney archives there's an even wilder version of the song, but composer George Bruns decided to tone down the recording a little bit to fit more within the realm of the film. But unfortunately, it wasn't all fun and games on the Disney set. In late 1966, Walt was discovered to have lung cancer, and on December 15, 1966, Walt Disney passed away at the age of 65. The Disney Studios would close its doors for a day before returning to work. You know, part of me wonders if Walt would have been upset at the studio for taking a day off, or proud of them for getting back to work after such little time. And really, this is kind of sad for me too, because one of my favorite parts of these videos is talking about Walt and all that he did to put his personal touches on the film. But, like the Disney Studio had to do in the 60s, we press on. And on October 18, 1967, just 10 months after Walt's death, The Jungle Book premiered in theaters.
Beautiful. That's real jungle harmony.
I like being a bear.
That's my boy.
So The Jungle Book ended up being the last film that Walt ever worked on. The question is, does the film live up to the standard that Walt had created over the last 30 years? Well, The Jungle Book pretty much plays out the way you think it would based on the production of the film. The story is very simple. Mowgli has to go back to the man village, and he doesn't want to. But honestly, despite the simplicity, all the elements that you need for a good story are still here, so it does still work out fine. The story also is very segmented, with Mowgli having various interactions with new characters throughout the film. And as I've said many times on this channel, I prefer one cohesive story as opposed to a compilation of segments, but for one reason or another, the segmented feel of this film doesn't bother me as much here. It's kind of hard to explain really, and maybe it was just me getting caught up in the various musical numbers that tended to accompany the segments, but it did still feel like everything was sort of connected, and it gave me that cohesiveness that I like even within a segmented story. The music in the film is fantastic. The juxtaposition between Bruns' mysterious-sounding score and the Sherman Brothers' fun-loving songs really does help the film a unique feel, and I enjoyed the soundtrack thoroughly throughout the film. In particular, almost all of the songs are really high energy and do have a habit of getting stuck in your head, especially I Want to Be Like You. But man, am I glad that they left in the Bare Necessities, because it really is a bona fide classic. But really, as expected, the shining point of The Jungle Book is in its characters. Much of the time of the production was spent bringing these characters to life, and man does it show, because they really are just bursting with personality. The best part about the characters is that because they have such bold and unique personalities, their interactions with one another are fun and full of energy. My favorite of these interactions, though, has to be the ones between Bagheera and Baloo. They are polar opposites, with the serious Bagheera and the carefree Baloo, and it's this stark difference that helps drive every conversation that they have with each other throughout the film, and it creates this fun tension but also camaraderie between the two, because at the end of the day, they both want the same thing: what's best for Mowgli. They just go about it two completely different ways. I know it wasn't intended this way, but it does sort of feel like Bagheera and Baloo are representations of the two different versions of the film coming together. Bagheera feels like a much more stoic and serious Kipling character, while Baloo is just a goofy Disney character. So it is fun to see them both on the screen at the same time, giving you a taste of the classic tale and the modern twist. I also really like the handling of the film's villain, Shere Khan. I talked a bit about this in my review for Peter Pan, the way that a film can build up the mystique of a character before actually showing them, and this technique is done to perfection in The Jungle Book. Throughout the film, we keep hearing characters talk in fear and reverence to Shere Khan, and the tiger helps drive the plot and the actions of the characters without even appearing on screen for nearly an hour. What this helps accomplish is that by the time we do see Shere Khan, the character's personality can be more on display because he doesn't have to show that he's the bad guy. We know it already. Instead, Shere Khan can be this more sophisticated, almost soft-spoken character, and still have the aura of danger because of how the other characters are reacting to him. In all, I think it helps make Shere Khan sort of an underrated villain, because even though he's not in a lot of the film, it still feels like he is, and I personally enjoyed just about every scene that he was in. Shere Khan manages to let the other characters do the talking for him, so that by the time he shows up, he's already established as a character to fear. In the end, The Jungle Book is just a fun movie, and that's really the only way to describe it. Every element of it, the story, the music, and the characters, all come together to just leave me as the viewer feeling good after watching it. And in a way, I'm almost glad that this was Walt's last film, because it really encompasses everything that made him so great. The Jungle Book is a feel-good movie with timeless characters, and a must-watch for not only Disney fans, but movie fans in general. With Walt gone, it was imperative that The Jungle Book perform well at the box office, and luckily for the studio, that's exactly what happened. The movie, which cost $4 million to make, has brought in a whopping $205 million in its lifetime, and possibly even more important, the movie also garnered almost universal praise from the critics, something that hadn't happened for a Disney movie in quite some time. I've seen some people suggest that a lot of the positive reviews from critics was nostalgia-based in reverence to the great Walt Disney. And I can see some of where this argument makes sense. For example, a lot of Disney films at the time would be blasted for straying from the source material, and The Jungle Book is sort of the prime example of that. But even modern-day critics really hold The Jungle Book in high regard, so I think it's just fair to say that critics and audiences alike just really like The Jungle Book. The Jungle Book was so popular that it actually received a sequel of sorts by way of a 1968 record entitled More Jungle Book, which actually brought back Phil Harris and Louis Prima in a musical adventure to get Mowgli back from the Man Village. The film got a more traditional sequel in a 2003 film, Jungle Book 2, and has received a few live-action versions, with 1994's The Jungle Book, the 1998 sequel, Mowgli's Story, and the upcoming live-action version due to be released in early 2016. The film has also been re-released 3 times, in 1978, 1984, and 1990, and spawned 2 different television shows, Tailspin, which put the characters in a modern air pirate story, and Jungle Cubs, which followed everyone as kids. And even today, animators still reference the art and characters of The Jungle Book as inspiration for modern-day projects. At the end of the day, The Jungle Book is proof that no matter how much time passes, great characters and fun stories can live on forever. Well guys, that wraps it up for me this week. Hope you all enjoyed, and let me know what your thoughts on The Jungle Book are. Also be sure to subscribe to my channel, check out my last video, my next video, and if you like this review, make sure you check out the Disney Guy Review playlist. And as always, be sure to check out my Twitter for all news for Joe the Disney Guy and the channel. And I'll see y'all next week.
A man's red flower, so I can be like you.